Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I'm your host for Tuesdays on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we've already talked about Silver Ravenwolf once, we've talked about Laurie Cabot, and now we're going to talk about Aleister Crowley. Specifically, the question is from someone whose friend is getting into the teachings of Aleister Crowley, and the questioner is basically mortified by this because of all the horrible things that they have heard about him, so they want to know, in our opinion, or possibly knowledge, whether or not he was actually into all these horrible things, whether he actually did human sacrifice, stuff like that. I need to start out by saying that we could really benefit at this point from having our practitioner of Thelema back on the channel. They would know infinitely more about this than I do because I have only just done a little bit of reading. I've done some basic reading in the past, but even just now I did more so than ever, which is still not a lot. Just a couple pages and just about the sacrifice thing and like biography from Wikipedia. Woo! So my knowledge of this subject is just reading off the internet, which you could just do yourself. You could find these answers yourself just by reading, so I guess the only benefit really of us doing these videos is to get our own personal opinion and take on it. So without further ado, in my personal, unprofessional opinion, being someone who is not a follower of Crowley's, not a scholar on Crowley, not any kind of authority, my opinion on the subject of whether he did human sacrifice is probably not. And here's why. There's a lot of things that we pretty much know about him from biographies and like actual things that people have said about him, people who knew him, things like that. We know that he claimed a lot of different titles about different things as he achieved and learned about things throughout his life. He took on many different titles. He was considered an occultist, a Freemason-ish. There's kind of argument about that he wasn't ever really technically a Freemason by accepted standards. He was a ceremonial magician, a writer, a poet. He was a mountaineer, a really great chess player, an avid lover, possibly a spy, so on and so forth. He had lots of sex and lots of affairs, a couple wives, a couple children. He also engaged in homosexual sex, which at the time in Britain was punishable by law, so that was kind of kept on the down low. He had otherwise very radical views on sex for the time, this being in the time when people really still didn't talk about it. He practiced sadomasochism at some point. He engaged in the ritual use of drugs, became addicted to drugs later on in his life. He didn't like his mother, but loved the fact that she referred to him as the Beast, which is a title that he claimed kind of throughout his life. This is all still from what I gathered from Wikipedia. He did at one point crucify a frog, and it talks about how he did it because he was very opposed to killing a living thing, but he thought that somehow drastically violating his own personal beliefs would lead to something great, would lead to some kind of great revelation. In other things that I read, like posts that people wrote about him, they talk about how he apparently, like, for sure sacrificed goats, but I didn't actually read that in what I read, just what other people said about him. So it is pretty accepted that he did from time to time use animal sacrifice. And I also read that he shot a man once who was mugging him, so self-defense. He climbed a lot of mountains, he traveled a lot, he used automatic writing, and he wrote a bunch of books through spirit message, kind of, things that were given to him through some kind of deity or angel. He founded religious orders. He's the founder of Thelema. He was initiated into several orders, the Golden Dawn, OTO, etc. He was a Rosicrucian. He initiated Gerald Gardner into said orders. He also apparently instructed his students to attempt to control their own behaviors and habits and things like changing the way they speak, and every time they would mess up, he told them to cut themselves with a blade each time they forgot as a reminder. So that is something I would not personally do, but I read that he said that. He used sex magic a lot. He employed prostitutes. There was a noted minor element of racism and bigotry in his writings, but there was also a lot of contradiction with that, so it's uncertain really what he felt about things like that. Same with his misogynistic tendencies, but he was a guy that really liked contradiction, so that kind of makes sense. like I said before, he was all of these things. Some people would say these terrible things, but he was also a really great chess player. Gave up, apparently, before becoming like a master chess player. He loved climbing mountains and visiting other countries and learning about their beliefs. He did a lot of traveling and learning about Eastern religions. He was possibly a spy, and he was also on the cover of a Beatles album. What have you done with your life? So, throughout all of this, I learned all these little things about his life, but also in the Wikipedia page it mentions that a Crowley expert, a scholar on this man, wrote about him and said specifically he did not perform or advocate human sacrifice. And that expert biographer type person wanted to be really clear about that. He never actually did or promoted human sacrifice. However, he did like to write in code. He was a person who really enjoyed being clever and knowing more than people, and he liked to say things and know that other people didn't know what he was actually talking about. And so, if you look at, I will put a link in the description, if you look at the actual text of the thing that's being talked about here, mostly his chapter on the bloody sacrifice, quote unquote, the expert that I just mentioned before said that he liked to use code in his writings because it meant that people didn't know what he was actually talking about unless they had been taught. So unless you were in the in crowd, in the know, and knew what he was actually writing about, it would seem that he was talking about something entirely different. And so they said that he used codes of sacrifice, like words like blood, death, killing, but when he was actually talking about homosexual or heterosexual, I guess, sex, which I said was a thing that was not spoken about at the time. Even in society today, we're always talking about how it's ridiculous that, like, talking about loving people and sex and intimacy and physical pleasure is looked down upon as, like, weird, taboo, like, don't bring that up, whatever. Yet, at the same time, we can look on images of violence, killing, pain, and that's okay. Like, we're conditioned to that, where if there's a gay sex scene in a movie, it's gonna be like, oh, don't let your kids see that, but your kids can watch movies about people getting shot in the face, and that's just silly. And so I think it's the same kind of thing here. As a couple other pages pointed out, if he actually did this bloody sacrifice as much as his writings said he did, that means he would have killed thousands of children in these few years, and that's pretty ridiculous. So I mean, obviously no, I don't know for sure. Maybe he really did practice human sacrifice, but I personally am fully willing to believe, and I guess I prefer to believe, in the idea that he was just so into code and being clever and liking that he was smarter than other people and he was in this elite group of knowledge that he wrote these things knowing that people would misinterpret what he was saying. And even if you look at the chapter, again, I'm going to put the link to it, the chapter even ends with the phrase, "You are also likely to get into trouble over this chapter unless you truly comprehend its meaning." He basically says right there, like, yes, these are all the things, I'm laying it out straight for you, like, this is how the sacrifice is performed. Oh, by the way, if you don't actually know what this is about, that could cause problems. So, and as the little notes on this chapter also says in the link, you can read it, it says, there is a traditional saying that whenever an adept seems to have made a straightforward, comprehensible statement, such as, hey, I kill people, then it is most certain that he means something entirely different. The truth is nevertheless clearly set forth in his words. It is his simplicity that baffles the unworthy. So in my own opinion, as I said, personal and totally unprofessional, not a scholar on this guy, just read a couple pages, but from my own interpretation and what I've seen people say and just what I think is pretty well known about this guy, that he loved being contradictory, loved being controversial, loved to stir up arguments on purpose. Yeah, I'm gonna say no. He probably actually wasn't into all of that stuff. He just wrote about it. But I think he would have loved all the controversy about it. Like, there's also a, what do you call it? What's the word? A forum, a discussion forum on it where people are like, yeah, he definitely killed people. He killed all these people. He was a Satanist. He did all this stuff. Like, he said he kills people. So he kills people. And they just don't at all consider the possibility that sometimes people say things meaning something totally different. He was a poet. He chose his name based on the meter of it and how it sounded, and I think that's awesome. You know, so I don't know, I think that the way his mind works, or the way we have been told that his mind works, sort of attests to the fact that he was probably not speaking literally. Like I said, I wish we had a practitioner of Thelema on here, again, to give their opinion. Hopefully some of you maybe are and will give your opinion. Please do so, because it's all about opinions. I could be totally wrong, and I admit that, but it's okay with me. So, yeah, that's the end of this video. I will see you guys next week. Thank you very much for watching, and until then, blessed be, and don't forget to be awesome. Bye.